The wind carried dust across the wide stretch of prairie as the afternoon sun leaned low in the sky. The land seemed endless, a sea of golden grass broken only by scattered cottonwood trees and the distant line of mountains far to the west. A single ranch house stood alone in that vast emptiness, its wooden boards faded by years of sun and storms. Daniel Harper stepped out onto the porch and rested his forearms on the railing. He had lived on that ranch for nearly 10 years now, ever since the war had ended, and he had decided he'd had enough of crowded towns and noisy people. Out here, the land spoke slowly, and a man could hear his own thoughts. His cattle grazed lazily in the far pasture, small dark shapes against the tall grass. A hawk circled overhead, riding the warm currents of air. Daniel was about to step back inside when he noticed something unusual far down the dirt road. A cloud of dust. Someone was coming. He narrowed his eyes and waited. Visitors were rare. The nearest town sat nearly 15 miles away, and most travelers stayed on the main road that curved south. As the dust cloud moved closer, Daniel could make out 3 horses. 2 riders wore dark coats and wide hats. The third horse carried someone slumped forward in the saddle. Sheriff's men. Daniel felt a quiet tension settle in his chest. He stepped down from the porch just as the riders reached the gate. The horses slowed, breathing hard from the long ride. The man in front tipped his hat slightly. "Afternoon," he said. "Afternoon," Daniel replied calmly. The sheriff's deputy looked past him toward the house. "We're looking for a girl," the deputy said. "Chinese, about 20, maybe younger. Small, black hair." Daniel's face showed no change. "Don't see many people out here," he said. The second rider leaned forward. "She escaped custody this morning," he added. "They say she stabbed a man in town. Might be dangerous." Daniel said nothing for a moment. Then he shook his head slowly. "Haven't seen anyone," he said. The deputies exchanged a glance. Just then the wind shifted slightly, and from inside the ranch house a faint sound came from the back room, the smallest movement. The deputy's eyes flicked toward the door. "You live here alone?" he asked. Daniel hesitated, only for a heartbeat. Then he said the words that would change everything. "No." The deputies looked at him. "My wife's inside," Daniel said. For a moment the prairie seemed to fall completely silent. The deputy raised an eyebrow. "Your wife?" Daniel nodded. "She don't like strangers much," he added. "Been sick lately." The second deputy leaned forward slightly in the saddle. "You mind if we take a look anyway?" Daniel's expression hardened just enough. "My wife's resting," he said quietly. The deputies studied him. They knew Daniel Harper by reputation. A quiet rancher, hard worker, kept to himself, not the sort to cause trouble. Finally the first deputy sighed. "Well," he said, adjusting his reins, "if you see anyone matching that description, you send word to town." Daniel nodded. "Of course." The horses turned slowly, and the riders began heading back down the road. Daniel stood there until the dust cloud disappeared beyond the hill. Only then did he release the breath he had been holding. He turned and walked quickly back into the house. Inside, the small cabin smelled of wood smoke and fresh bread. The fire crackled softly in the iron stove. And in the corner near the back door stood the girl. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her clothes were dusty and torn from running. Fear filled her eyes as she watched him. She held a kitchen knife in both hands. Daniel stopped a few steps away. "You can put that down," he said calmly. She didn't move. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "Why did you lie?" Daniel shrugged slightly. Seemed easier than explaining. She stared at him, still gripping the knife. "You don't know me," she said. "No," Daniel replied. She hesitated. "Then why help me?" Daniel walked past her and poured water into a tin cup. He handed it to her. "You looked like someone who needed help," he said. The girl lowered the knife slowly but didn't drop it. "What did they tell you?" she asked quietly. "That you stabbed a man," Daniel said. She looked down at the floor. "I did." The words hung in the air between them. Daniel leaned against the wall. "Why?" he asked. The girl didn't answer for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. "He tried to buy me." Daniel frowned slightly. She continued, "My father worked on the railroad when I was small. When he died, I had no one. The man who owned the boarding house said I owed money, said I had to work it off." Her hands tightened slightly around the knife, but he didn't mean cleaning. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I ran away," she continued. "He found me yesterday, said I belonged to him." She swallowed. "I had the knife for cutting vegetables. When he grabbed me, I used it." Daniel studied her face carefully. There was fear there, but also something else. "Truth. What's your name?" he asked. "May," she said softly. Daniel nodded once. "Well, May," he said, "looks like you're my wife now." For the first time since he met her, she almost smiled. The days that followed were tense at first. May expected Daniel to change his mind. She expected him to send her away or turn her over to the sheriff. But he didn't. Instead, he put her to work around the ranch. She helped cook meals, repair clothes, and tend the small garden behind the house. Daniel showed her how to ride properly and how to spot storms rolling in across the plains. Little by little, the fear in her eyes began to fade. One evening, they sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. May looked out across the wide fields. "Why do you live so far from everyone?" she asked. Daniel shrugged. "People are complicated." She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, "they are." Weeks passed. Then one morning the sound of horses returned to the ranch. 3 riders again, but this time the sheriff himself rode at the front. May froze when she saw them through the window. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "Stay inside," he said. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him. The sheriff dismounted slowly. "We've got a problem, Daniel," he said. Daniel crossed his arms. "What kind? We tracked that girl this far." The sheriff said, "Some folks think she might have had help." Daniel said nothing. The sheriff studied him. "You still claim you've got a wife in there?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes." The sheriff walked slowly toward the porch. "Well," he said, "I'd sure like to meet her." Inside the house, May's heart pounded. She knew the lie couldn't last forever. Her eyes moved to the back door. She could run again, disappear into the hills. But then she looked around the small cabin, the warm stove, the table they had shared meals at, the life she had started to believe in. Her hands trembled. Outside, the sheriff knocked on the door. Daniel turned and opened it. May stood there, quiet, still. Her eyes lifted to meet the sheriff's. For a long moment no one spoke. Then the sheriff sighed. "Well, I'll be," he said. Daniel waited. The sheriff tipped his hat slightly. "Ma'am." May bowed her head politely. The sheriff looked back at Daniel, then at May again. Finally he shook his head and turned back toward his horse. "Guess we were chasing ghosts," he muttered. As the riders left the ranch once more, Daniel stepped back inside. May looked at him. "You risked everything," she said softly. Daniel shrugged. "Sometimes the law gets things wrong." She studied his face. "And now?" she asked. Daniel glanced out the window at the endless prairie. "Well," he said slowly, "a man can't lie about having a wife forever." May tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" Daniel looked back at her. "For a lie to last," he said, "sometimes it has to become the truth." For the first time since she arrived at the lonely ranch, May smiled without fear. And outside, the wide prairie wind carried their quiet future across the open land.